Well, I'm delighted to welcome you back to the sixth webinar in this series, Digging Deeper in Lockdown, Archaeology and the Bible. And in some ways, today's webinar is the biggest challenge because previously I've taken what I would normally do in a museum tour, taking a couple of hours, reduce it to 30 minutes. Today I'm going to try and do the same thing, but for more like a 4 or 5 day tour in the Holy Land. Now I'm using the word Holy Land advisedly because obviously there are issues of political borders nowadays, which mean it's better to use the phrase Holy Land when I'm talking about the New Testament times. As ever, there's going to be a meze of 10 dishes, 10 points rather than 3 big ones. I hope that this will bring the Bible more to life, and as ever with these tours, show the reliability of the scriptures and the promises that are in them. Today there's going to be quite a mixture as we go through the Holy Land. It's been very hard knowing what to keep in, what to take out. I've decided to be fairly rigid and stick to things which are directly related to archaeology and the Bible. So yeah, so no kibbutzes, crusader castles, a bit less on the golden mosaics front, and we're going to follow a general theme of going north to south. There'll be a good mixture of things. I've got a couple of times we're going to go underground, a couple of examples of work done by Herod the Great, some of his monumental architecture, and a couple of Old Testament passages, so quite a mixture. It won't just be ruin after ruin. And as usual, there'll be a time of Q&A at the end for those who are watching this live. So without any further ado, I'm going to show you our first slide. So this is the map we're going to follow, and you can see here we're going to start in the far north with Banias, which is part of the Golan Heights area nowadays. And if I can make this work, that is somewhere up here, the far north. We've got Banias, and that is actually above sea level, and then we're going to go downhill from there. Hopefully not true of this lecture as a whole. So we're going to go downhill to the Sea of Galilee, which is the lowest freshwater lake on the planet, at 200 meters below sea level, and then on down the Jordan Valley, heading south to the large expanse at the bottom, the Dead Sea, which is, I think it's the lowest point on the face of the earth, which is around 400 meters below sea level. So on our way from north to south, or we're starting off at Banias on the footsteps of Mount Hermon, we're going to go to Caesarea, which is here. You can see on the coast, Galilee, so not exactly following north-south, but Galilee, Jerusalem, here, a few sites there, and then finishing off with En-Gedi on the shores of the Dead Sea. So the first place we're going to go is Banias. Now this is far north, and if you ever try to draw a map of where Jesus is going, there's lots of zigzagging around Galilee, and then an unexplained trip north to this place called Banias, or at the time Caesarea Philippi. And this was really departing from his home area to go to an area which was more pagan. There was a big cave there, which was known as the mouth of the underworld. It's near the mouth of the Jordan itself, and there is a terrace where there are all sorts of shrines cut into the rock for the worship of pagan deities. And it was there at Caesarea Philippi that Jesus asked the key question, who do people say that I am? They gave various answers, and then he turned round to his followers and said, what about you? Who do you say I am? And it was Peter who replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. to which Jesus said, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. This was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven." And at that point, through the Gospels, Jesus's path leads south to Jerusalem and to his death. And there are frequent warnings then of what's going to happen to him. It's almost as though his identity was the key thing. If his mission was not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many, if his mission was to give his life, he couldn't do that until his identity had been recognized. And the place he did this, at this important place, was at Banias. And I'm just going to go there now and show you. It's a beautiful picture here of the, here we are, the mouth of the Jordan. That's a cave that was sometimes known as the mouth of Hades or the underworld, which makes sense when when Jesus follows up his statement to Peter with the statement, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or the underworld, shall not prevail against it." That's the mouth of the Jordan. And funny enough, when I was there, it seems an appropriate place to do some collecting of my own. So I brought here, it's not wine, it's actually a bottle of Jordan River, which I picked up. It's been in there for 22 years, and I'm rather scared to open it now in case I start some awful biological incident. So there it is. Now, from there we'll go to, here we are, Caesarea on the coast. Caesarea was a Roman city with temples, a hippodrome, horse racing place, theatres where there are modern classical concerts done nowadays, and a huge harbour, which was a bit like Heathrow. So if you're trying to travel from Jerusalem to Rome in those days, you get the Caesarea link or something, and you pick up your boat from Terminal 3, and you head out of Caesarea across the Mediterranean to your destination. Here you can see, I mean, it was a bit of a vanity project by Herod the Great, who was Herod when Jesus was born, to build a city in a place without a natural fresh water, and hence it all had to be brought in for 6 miles by Roman aqueduct, and that has to be one of the most stunningly located aqueducts in the world. And I've given you a couple of references to Caesarea, which was, if you were Roman, it was definitely the best place to be. You wouldn't want to be in Jerusalem or one of these other troubled cities. Much better to be somewhere with all mod cons like Caesarea. And I've given you some references there. Caesarea was also the place where an inscription was found to Pontius Pilate. Strangely, although he was mentioned in literature, there were no archaeological references to him until this discovery in 1961. You can see the carving there on the second line, something like Tius, the end of Pontius, Ius Pilatus, on that carving. Now, next we're going to go back inland to Galilee and to Capernaum. So Jesus's ministry, his 3-year ministry, was centered around Galilee. This was an area of hotbeds and a hotbed of insurrection. It was where the Zealots came from. They had amazing hideout in the Valley of the Doves up there, where Roman legionaries had to be lowered down by ropes so they could get into these caves to deal with the rebels there. It was the place where the Jewish war started in 66, which led to the destruction of the temple. But this place was where Jesus built his ministry, especially around the 3 towns of Capernaum, Bethsaida, where Peter and Andrew were from, and Chorazin. Now I'm going to show you here a picture of Capernaum seen from up above. Here we are. You can see the wonderful freshwater Sea of Galilee there. In the foreground, you can see left of center a square structure, which is the synagogue. That's the 4th century building, but built on the site of the synagogue, which was there where Jesus performed his first exorcism. And it's extraordinary being in a place where Jesus himself walked, stood, taught. And underneath the thing on the right, which looks a bit like a spaceship or Millennium Falcon or something, that's a church built over the site of Simon Peter's house. And it seems likely that, in spite of Jesus saying he had nowhere to lay his head, foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere, Jesus did have a series of places where he could call home. And Mark 2 verse 1 says that when he was in Capernaum, the people knew that's where to find him. That was his home. I think what struck me most when I was there was the smallness of this settlement, and the other settlements around the shores of the Sea of Galilee at that time. I should say that on my first visit to Israel, I was just been married for 2 or 3 years. I was also a student at Cambridge doing theology, and when you're studying theology, they do tend to question a lot of the basis for Christian faith by questioning our source documents. In particular, I remember my first lecture on Christian mission with a Herr Dr. Winrich Löhr, and he said, well, of course we must begin with the Great Commission, where Jesus said in Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. And he said, well, of course, we know that Jesus never said any such thing. I really wasn't expecting that was going to be how he would begin. And I challenged him on it afterwards, and we had a good conversation. And stay behind for the Q&A if you want to know how that evolved. He was wrong, essentially. It was when I was on the Sea of Galilee, several months into my course, and when I was having various questions and doubts, that I was on a boat, and I suddenly thought about the size of these settlements, and the fact that Peter and others are known across the, across the Mediterranean world. When Paul's writing to the Corinthian church, Paul, a Jew from Tarsus, is writing to the church in Corinth in Europe, and is using arguments from the fact that Peter takes a wife along with him. It appears that Peter, or Cephas, is known to the church there. You wonder, how on earth does anybody know anything about these ordinary people from these little settlements? How are they getting known? Why are they traveling from their homeland and their hometown? I mean, going to Jerusalem was a big enough trip. And I had one of those rushes of faith whereas, well, it's because this is true. That is what propelled everything forward. And these ordinary people from their day jobs into traveling the way they did, and getting known around the Mediterranean world. So that was on the Sea of Galilee. We're now going to head south, and we're going to come to Jerusalem. And we're going to begin with one of our first underground trips. Jerusalem was an Old Testament city as well as a New Testament one, founded by David, and then we mentioned it in our series on the Assyrian top 10 a few weeks ago, as the place which Sennacherib tried to attack but was repelled. Now, in preparation for that attack and that siege, Hezekiah diverted some water, and this is recorded in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. He diverted a spring of water to bring it into the city to ensure a fresh water supply during the siege. Now, astonishingly, that actual tunnel, that diverted tunnel that Hezekiah dug, has been found. And not just found, you can walk through it. Your feet get wet, you can walk through that tunnel, and in the middle of the tunnel there, an inscription was found that actually describes the moment when the excavators from both ends of this tunnel broke through. I mean, thank goodness they heard each other's picks, And if they hadn't, we'd ended up with two Hezekiah's tunnels going side by side. But now going to take you to the tunnel, take you underground. Here we are. Now, wasn't long after this that my wife revealed that she was claustrophobic. So I think if she hadn't been before and had any tendency that way, this would probably be enough. And you can see there a map with the route of the watercourse. And at the meeting point, you can see there, that is where the inscription was found. And I've given you the reference in the Old Testament, which refers to this tunnel being built. Lovely little bit of confirmation, almost a throwaway line in the Old Testament. Here we can see exactly what they were talking about. It's a lovely correlation between archaeology and the Bible. At the top, we can see the Temple Mount. This, of course, would have been the first temple, the one that was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC, and was replaced with the temple built by Zerubbabel after the return from exile, and then expanded by Herod. Now, just south of the Temple Mount, you see an area called Ophel, O-P-H-E-L, which we'll come back to. Now, you've probably had far more than enough time underground, so we'll now take the jump, and I've got a lovely slide for you next. Isn't it nice being back on ground level? So here we are. That is a famous drawing, I think, by an archaeologist, Leon Rittmeyer, of the temple as he believes it would have been at the time of Jesus. So marvelous sight. Few things you ought to be aware of here. I'll show you. So looking through this list, Herod the Great. Again, this is the second of his huge constructions. 46 years is the time it took for the temple to be built, according to John 2, verse 20. Robinson's Arch is this monumental arch here. So, and the remnants of that arch are what you can see up there. So that's just where the arch would come out of the wall. The Wailing Wall, the famous Wailing Wall, where people stick prayers into cracks in the rocks, is there, and on our map that is here. So this is the closest that you can get nowadays to the old temple and Holy of Holies, which is why it's a special place for the Jews. Although in fact, around 1998 or 9, I believe, a much larger section of the wall has been exposed, but you have to go underground to see it. And in there are some of these huge stones, Herodian ashlars, they're called, A-S-H-L-A-R. One of them is 570 tons in weight. I mean, this is an extraordinary building achievement. It was the largest man-made structure on the face of the earth in the 1st century, 22 football pitches in size across the top. And so it remained until AD 70, when it was destroyed by the Romans. And as Jesus predicted, not one stone was left on top of another. The Sanhedrin would meet here in this part, this lovely building. The Holy of Holies, which is here. The big curtain would have hung on the back side of what you can see there, so clearly visible from the Mount of Olives, which is up here, which is where the ascension took place. And lastly, the Roman garrison is here, and that features in the book of Acts, which is where when Paul was rescued from a lynch mob. Where does the temple occur? Where is it mentioned? Well, many times, of course, in the Gospels. I've got a few examples for you. If you remember, this is the scene where in Luke chapter 2, Jesus, his parents, Joseph and Mary, went back to find him after losing him for 3 days, every parent's nightmare. And they, it says after 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers. Towards the end of Jesus' life, when they were in Jerusalem, one of the disciples was a bit carried away they didn't have cameras in those days, but you can imagine him getting his out. And as he came out, he said to Jesus, as he came out, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and wonderful buildings." Well, I think Jesus didn't want him to be too impressed by the buildings, and gave him a warning after that. And then Acts 2, where the early church, it says in Acts 2 verse 42, it says, every day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming that Jesus was the Christ. So there you can see the temple courts where these the early church would be gathering for its meetings and to teach people. So hugely impressive building, of course, the temple, and the people in power were none other than the Sanhedrin and the chief priest. Now the priestly family to whom Caius and Annas belonged remained in power under several successive governors. They were political maneuverers, and to help them in their task, it's believed they had pits underneath their house, which it is very possible were used to keep prisoners in, so or undesirables. Now we are going now to visit the house of Caiaphas. If you remember, this is where Jesus had one of his trials the night before he was crucified, and he was grilled by the priests, and one of them, Caiaphas, put him on the spot at the end and said, "Tell us, I adjure you, by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." And Jesus replied, "It is as you say." They said, "This is blasphemy," and that was it. He was condemned, and then it was a matter of taking him to the Romans as soon as it could be arranged for him to be put to death. Now, unfortunately, the trial took place at night, and Pontius Pilate wasn't yet out of his bed that morning, so they had a few hours not knowing what to do with Jesus. And although this is speculation, it's not fantastical speculation, and I'm not the first to suggest that Jesus may well have been put into one of those pits, underground rooms, during the night, which would have been an awful experience. We are going to go now to Caiaphas's house. There's now a church built on top of it called St. Peter Gallicantu. Peter at the crowing of the cockerel. Peter denied Jesus 3 times just outside Caiaphas's house. And if I can make the technology work, I'm going to try to show you a video of a group down there. It's only 35 seconds long or so. If you can bear with me, this is a group that's meeting there. And do, as you go around, do look up. It's obviously clean now. It would have been far from clean at the time it was used to keep people in. Very likely water and worse in the bottom. And the only way in and out was not the stairs that are there now, but a hole through the roof where you'd be lowered on a rope. And you couldn't get out apart from waiting for
Filled with troubles, and my life draws near to the netherworld. I am numbered with those who go down into the pit. I am a man without strength. My couch is among the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no longer, and who are cut off from your care.
Thank you. From there, Jesus is led away to Pilate, and then to be crucified. And this is the place where traditionally it's believed that Jesus was crucified, and then where his dead body was laid on a stone, the stone of anointing, you can see in the bottom left, to be wrapped up and embalmed, and also where the tomb sits. So all three of those sites are believed to be located inside the building in front of you, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, this is a church that was built by Constantine's mother. She clearly didn't have quite enough to do, so he gave her the job of finding places, and she built quite a few churches. This one in 326, and amazingly, the wooden doors, which are open so you can't see them there, but are the same doors built from when the church was first opened. Are these really the sites of where those three things happened? Well, it seems as though that's what she was told in 326. Tradition is a very strong force, but really whether they are there or somewhere not very far away, the important thing is that it happened. And sites like this are a reminder that if it didn't happen here, it did happen, and if it did happen not very far away from this spot. Sadly, this the church is something of a byword in what can go wrong. There's a saying that Jesus promised us the kingdom of God and all we got was the church. Well, the church is divided many times, and there are 6 different groups who share possession of this site. Unfortunately, they are so fragmented that the key to the front door is actually held by a Muslim family who live next door. And another testimony to the fragility of the peace among them is there's a little ladder. I don't know if you can see it, just here under that window. That basically nothing can be done at this site without the agreement of all 6 groups. And for that reason, the ladder has been there since 1757. And you'd probably start an international incident if you tried to move it. So why was there so much uncertainty over the place of the place where all this happened, and where surely the Christians would have, these are very important places for them to keep. Well, I would put it to you that if you had been a witness of the resurrection of Jesus and believed death had been conquered, then the last thing you do is start sketching out plans for a monumental structure. You actually are busy sharing the implications for the world of this great news, the good news that in Jesus, death itself had been put to death, sin conquered, and there was meaning and purpose, and that God had come and visited his people and was with us, and had ushered in a new age, a new covenant, the promised hope of Israel. So this is what the early church did. They didn't stop. They didn't have big financial backers. They didn't stop to build churches. And so, of course, this is entirely coincident, entirely natural that it would take several centuries before churches would actually be being built in this way. Now, we mentioned the proclamation of the early church. Well, they went out, and the birthday of the church is the day of Pentecost, just a few weeks after the resurrection, where Peter preached to the people. In response, it says they were cut to the heart. He challenged them that it was their sin that had put the Jesus of Nazareth to death. They were cut to the heart and said, "What shall we do?" And he said, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of your sins, and you'll receive the gift of the Spirit." People say, well, how on earth could there be baptisms, that many? Because Acts records around 3,000 being added to the number that day, the clear implication being through baptism. Well, actually, water was not a problem. During excavations of the Ophel area, which I showed you earlier, huge numbers of cisterns and baths have been revealed, which were places of ritual washing. And this wasn't just, a hand basin. These were total immersion pools, plunge pools, if you will. In order for them to be valid, it had to be running water, but apparently that was satisfied by just changing a cupful of water so it wouldn't be the same as for the previous person. So here we are. These are the mikvots at the offal end under those arches. There's an example of one of those pools. Christian baptism, because in that sense it was taking an existing tradition, the ritual washings which were already happening, which John of course had been doing in literal running water in the Jordan River, John the Baptist. What distinguished Christian baptism was that it was a one-off thing. You didn't have to keep doing it every Sunday before church or communion. It was a one-off thing. It brought you into Christ. It was your one-off association with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and it was in his name. This, of course, was new. The previous Jewish ritual immersions didn't feature those things, and also conferred the Holy Spirit. The link with forgiveness of sins, of course, is nothing new. That had been a link with the picture of washing, and that had been a link made by the Jews before the time of Christian baptism in Acts chapter 2. Now, lastly, we're going to finish by going south to En Gedi. This is our last Old Testament site. Very, very dry. This is next to the Dead Sea, which, as I said before, is a very low place on the face of the earth. Very dry. It's a place where Israelis like to come at the time of the Feast of Tabernacles, which translates in the modern era into let's go on a camping holiday. But if you're going to survive anywhere down here, you need fresh water, and there's not a lot. The Dead Sea certainly isn't fresh water. It would kill you if you drank it. So I went there early one morning. It was our last day of a second visit there, and a friend and I, we actually broke through under a gate to get there, and we made our way up, and we found these lovely streams of water, which you can see there. En Gedi, we know from the Old Testament, was where David went with his men on more than one occasion. In fact, when Saul wanted to know where David was, he was told he's in En Gedi, and they headed for the Wild Goats Rocks. And of course, you go straight to where the water is. A bit like predators and prey in Africa, the water hole is where you'll find other people, because we need water. And there's the river. Now, as we were leaving En Gedi, here on the next picture, there you can see, there's also a reference in the Old Testament to the cave of Adullam, where 300 people in debt, distressed and discontented. So yeah, not the easiest group to work with. Met David. So obviously don't know if the rocks are exactly the same now as they were back then, but there is a huge cave you can see on the right, which is exactly the sort of place where you might meet. And it rather dwarfs my friend there, who's actually a amateur boxing champion of Northern Ireland, and even he looks quite small in that cave. Now, as we were leaving, Chris and I were accosted by some Israeli security officials. Chris very wisely scarpered, and being a bit bigger than me, the officials swooped on me. I was terrified. I thought they were going to make an example of me, and threatened to fine me and take my passport and all sorts of things for having gone up while the valley was officially closed. They let me off. They said, "Oh, we want you to enjoy Israel." But they did say, look, the reason this is closed is because this is the opportunity that the wild goats have to come and to drink when the tourists aren't coming up. And then I felt slightly bad. I did take a photograph while I was up there of an early morning goat coming down to drink. And of course, it brought to mind that passage from the Psalms, as a deer pants for flowing streams, so my soul pants for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Written by David, I believe, or another psalmist, but I guess people who are familiar with panting, with thirst, and the precious value of fresh water. So we've now travelled. Water has been a theme of many of these slides. We've now travelled. We're at the end, but I'll just take us sort of back to the beginning as well. And those words of Jesus. And really, this whole webinar hopefully helps bring to life the Bible, but also forces you to think not just, oh, this is very interesting, but whether these things really happened. In particular, whether we can trust the promises of Jesus. Did he really say the things that he said? Here's a wonderful quote from Jesus, which is a promise, which I believe. Jesus said, "Whoever believes in me shall never thirst." So is that a promise I can rely on? And again, going back to the beginning, if you remember what Jesus said, "What about you?" he said to his disciples. "Who do you say that I am?" I'd like to ask you that question if you're watching, whether live or after the event, to reflect on these things and ask yourself, who do you believe that Jesus really is? Where does the evidence point? We're going to, here's a summary of the 10 points we've looked at. Then if you can join next week, we're going to be following the footsteps of an ardent persecutor of Jesus who would have approved of his death, who became the great preacher and missionary. But I hope you can join us next week. Thank you very much for your time.